Good Monday morning. And this is going to be a two things today. And we'll start out with what's going on the screen here and what we've titled this broadcast this morning. A lot of people spend a lot of energy trying to prove God is real or that Jesus was real. That is their basis of the entire belief system. It seems to be proving this, grabbing a hold of everything they can to prove this, whether it's a feeling they've got or whether it's experience they had. This is so important to them. It's like putting the messenger ahead of the message. So we're not going to argue, is there God or not? We're tossing that argument aside. We're tossing the argument aside about whether Jesus is real or not. Because we're going to talk about a message. What would an all-knowing, benevolent, loving, merciful God have to say to his creation? And I started to say his or her creation. We seem to get caught up in gender when we talk about things. We relate. We really, gender seems to be very important to us. We always refer to God as he. We always put this male figure in there. All the depictions that men have drawn, there's always a male figure that is always important. Even when it comes to angels, seems the feminine doesn't come in until we get to the level of angels. In the Christian tradition, the feminine doesn't equate to a God figure, does it? But we've got this concept. We've seen these images, paintings of some artist's depiction of what Jesus looks like. We've got this image that seems to be important to us. But what seems less important is what message. What would this God say to us? What would this creator God say to his creation? I would assume that most would think that their God is smarter than they are. Would you say that? More powerful than humans are? Would you agree with that? But if you really think about it, we tend to humanize our deity, don't we? We tend to humanize our deity, and we tend to keep Jesus as this human-like figure with human-like emotions. And oh yes, but then what Scripture said, we're made in the image of God, doesn't it? How do you balance all this out? So you take the Bible story, and this all-knowing, benevolent, loving God created everything. Before he created the earth, he created the angels and all this other system. Of course, there's two different creation stories in the Bible. Keep that in mind too. But he eventually created humans. In the tradition of church and Christianity that I was raised in, we were, I don't know, I don't remember if we were exactly told these exact words, but we were kind kind of led on a path to believe that man had one less rib than women, because clearly God took a rib from man to create woman. And that was kind of the feeling you got. That's kind of what you went with. That was kind of the story that you bought, and you just didn't think much of it, And I remember as kids, it was like in the Christian um, society, that as kids we would, the girls would maybe brag the guys a little bit about they had one more rib than we did, and that sort of thing. There was all this competition, of course. Kind of find out it's not true. We got the same number of ribs as women. But what would God say? What would a God say? A loving, merciful, kind God. What would this loving, merciful, kind God have to say to his creation? If you look at the history of man, you look where we are today, you on one side would say, well, God's kind of let things go, kind of just letting his creation just kind of go their own way. That's why throughout history, a lot of people were more deist than theist. A deist was like, well, there's probably a God, but he don't have any kind of personal relationship with his creation. When I think mainstream Christianity today kind of has a combination of both of those, of deism and theism, kind of combined together. It's like on one scale, God's allowing things to play out. He's not intervening in these things. But on other scale, on a personal level, I can reach out to God and God will intervene in my life for me. Big shift there. God's working out his plan over here. And if God doesn't intervene with me and answer my prayers in the way that I want my prayers answered or that I expected when I prayed for, whatever, then God is allowing some purpose to work out in me. I guess the question really boils down to where does our views of God come from? Instead of this debate of is there a God or not, let's back up and let's just say where do we get our interpretations of this God? In Christianity, there are literally, thousands of different interpretations of God just within Christianity. They all have a certain history that we can look up and find out how these evolved. As far as where the Methodists came from, world Christianity consists of 6 major ecclesiastical cultural blocks divided into 300 major ecclesiastical traditions, composed of over 33,000 distinct denominations in 238 countries. These denominations themselves being composed of over 3,400,000 worship centers, churches, or congregations around the world. And for those most part who have been in Christianity, have exposed themselves to Christianity, that one time or the other have allowed themselves to visit different denominations, different, if you will, breeds of Christianity. So the first question I have to ask is, would a loving, all-knowing God allow for his word to be divided up in so many different ways? Being raised in Alabama, this is very prominent in our culture here. And being of my age and going through the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and George Wallace and all that, and the integration of schools. When I was the first several years of my grade school, we were segregated. The interesting, fascinating thing when we look at this is that one of the most segregated institutions left in our country is Christianity. You get a filtering, especially in these mega churches. You get a little bit of mixture of the races in there. Yeah, you do. It's not totally segregated. It's not like these churches are putting up a sign that says for blacks only or for whites only, but there's still a fact that community wise that the churches in my area of Alabaster, Alabama, I can pretty much tell you if I go to this church here, it's going to be majority white. It's going to be filled with white people. A black person is not. You've got to look. Is there a dark skinned person here, or is there it and then you can go a few streets over and there'll be another church, and you may not see one white person in there. It's all dark skinned people. A whole different flavor of Christianity, that professing the same God, professing the same Jesus died for my sins, professing the same hope of some eternity in some blissful heaven. But all these denominations, all these the segregation and out of all these 33,000 different denominations of Christianity around the world, somebody's not right. Somebody's got it wrong. I think that matters. I think it really matters when you're talking about an all-knowing, benevolent, loving God. That's division. That's somebody's not right. With all those different flavors, there are some levels of Christianity that Harry Potter's don't. That's banned. That's certain things. It's like you get in trouble within the congregation for Harry Potter. There's others that the women are not allowed to present themselves as teachers or ministers in that level, as far as standing on the pulpit in front of a congregation or even praying before a congregation. It's not allowed. There's some that if the women are put in a position, there's no man to pray, that the woman has to cover her head. Man don't. Man don't have to cover his head, but a woman would have to cover her head. There are some that still will be opposed to women wearing makeup or jewelry. And there's the Bible scriptures. The bottom line is there's text in the Bible to back up any of these different forms of Christianity. Those on the side of the Methodists that are opposed to gay marriage and homosexuality, they can handpick some verses out of there, and they can back that up. For those that think that they should support homosexuals and support gay marriage, they can find some scriptures, some text out of the Bible to back up their side of it. Even those who are known commonly as the snake handlers, they can pull a scripture out of the Bible to back up their beliefs in that. For the ones that the women have to cover their heads to pray, they can find a quote from the Bible to back that up. For those who support war against the Middle East, they can handpick some scripture out of there, can't they? Just it's very ambiguous. It's either a gross misinterpretation or it is a not really. This is two things here. Not really thinking, not really giving consideration to what the history of this book is about. Not really giving consideration to what would a real God, all powerful God, where would this God stand with all this? Is there really a Satan? Is everything blamed on this Satan? Is Satan really roaming the planet trying to get us? All these are very important questions if we come from this, this ground, this foundation of Christianity based on this book, the Bible. You've got to, first of all, examine the book that you're deriving this message from. And I'm not saying just learn the stories, and I'm not saying just memorize the text that you want to use to back up your form of this Christianity. But what is the root of this? What is the history of this book? A couple of days ago, a man, well known, Jack Van Impe, passed away at 88. Very active up until his death. He was a very popular televangelist, and he was one of the world's most well-known end-time preachers, and he knew the Bible. He quoted from the Bible in his sermons he knew it top of his head. He didn't have to look at a screen. He didn't have to open his Bible. This man was known as the walking Bible. He, throughout his life, had, yes, he knew those scriptures, and he could pull them out. And he tied in, he kind of like the way I was brought up. He tied in world events to biblical prophecy. He looked at world events and he would find a way to define these world events to fit in with this Bible prophecy. The most recent of his sermons on his website, his wife said these words. She said, friends, there's so much to consider out there. And I'm grateful that we have a president who says we are not going to be number two. We're going to stand up to what's happening. Then she turned to her husband and asked if there was going to be a war. And from the top of his head, now how well planned they had this presentation is anybody's guess. But he responded to her, the Bible says in Ezekiel 38:39, Gog, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, and Rosh are going to lead the battle. Who are they? Well, Gog is the leader. Meshach and Tubal is Moscow, and Tobolsk have to be interpreted. And all the Orient, Revelation says, is going with them. China, North Korea, all of them. It's going to be the bloodiest war in the world. The blood will flow to the bridles of the horses for 200 miles. 8 days after that episode, I heard Jack Van Impe died of a heart attack, I believe, 88 years old. So this was the part and parcel of his message. And they, like evangelicals throughout our nation, are staunch supporters of Trump. They're intertwining their patriotism, their nationalism, and using the Bible to support that. Now, to remind you of a couple of things there, that the Bible was also used by the similar group of people throughout recent history to subject women to men, to prevent there being equality of the race, gender, and also to enslave blacks. And there's no scripture found anywhere in the Bible to support the to condemn slavery all the way through. None. You cannot find any text in the Bible that's going to conform to being or condemning slavery. And the most recent writings, the later writings in the Bible by the one called Paul, the words are very strong about women being in subjection to their husbands and remaining silent in church. You can't dispute that. But Christianity in great part has grown away from that because culture, secular culture, has pushed them that way. So now that Jack Impey's been gone for a couple of days now that he has taken his last breath in his physical sense, I'm not even going to get into an afterlife. We're not discussing that point. His end times has come. I grew up with this end time prophecy thing my entire life. Everything was, my dad and I bonded in front of the TV in front of Walter Cronkite and David Blinkley and the news. Oh gosh, this is happening. That's just right in line in conjunction with what the Bible says, that, you know, there were some in my peer group that Richard Nixon was the last president. There wasn't going to be any presidents after Richard Nixon. This was going to be the end time, and based on the interpretation of this and the interpretation of that and blah, blah, blah. Well, all those people that were prophesying all that were interpreting the scripture that way, they're gone. End times still not here, but their end times came, as will all our end times at one time or the other. Bible literalism is the big problem because it is a book of Jewish stories. It was written by Jews. Jesus was a Jew, educated as a Jew, worshipped as a Jew, till he became an adult and he put a twist on the Jewish law and the Jewish tradition. So let's step back a second here, because we can kind of question clearly 33,000 different denominations around the world. We know what's going on with this split and the segregation within the churches and so forth. So let's back away from that book and let's realistically say that no God can be defined and held or contained within the words of a book. A book whose history we know all too well, and only those who choose to remain ignorant as to the history of this book, well, they'll never say, if they don't want to accept reality. I know in my spiritual journey throughout my life, we took our beliefs to heart more so than the average by a long shot. But to me, it was very important that if what I'm holding on to and the version of God that I'm believing is going to have some effect on my eternity, I think it's important that I really dig into what I'm believing. I think it's important that I dig in traditions that I'm holding on to and the interpretations of God and the way that I'm worshiping. I think it's very important. I think it's more important than Alabama football stats or Auburn football stats or what's on TV or any of those things. As the Van Imp had his 88 years here, it came to an abrupt end. And you look at the news and in your community, people are dying daily. The Armageddon comes. What's important at the end of that life, if you are a quote unquote believer, what is important? Is it important what you had in your bank account? Is it important what kind of car you drove? Is it important where you lived? Or is it important of what kind of message you live by? If you were God, and some people immediately, oh, don't go there. No, you have to go there. You're the one saying that we're created in the image of God. We're the ones that keep humanizing God. So I see nothing wrong with saying, if you were God, keeping in mind that you're not claiming to be perfect or God, but if you were God, if you were in the position, you had the power and ability of a God, why would you sit idly by and not intervene to stop tragedy, but you would wait for people to plead and beg for mercy, for aid from you? Instead of preventing this incident from happening, instead of preventing cancer from being an issue or preventing this horrible accident from taking place, I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let humans get in the situation they put themselves in. Then I'm going to sit back and listen to them plead with me to get them out of that situation, to give them the strength to get out of that situation. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to wait. I want to hear those pleas. And what's going to be even more important to me, according to the common views of this God, is that the more people that they can get to plead with them to me, the more apt I am to listen. It's kind of like a popularity thing. Joe over here, he don't know many people. He's pretty much alone, homeless under a bridge, praying by himself. He don't have access to the internet to get prayer warriors, or he doesn't have. He's nasty and dirty because he hadn't been able to get a shower or a bath, and I mean they won't even allow him in to walk into a church. It's just homeless person needs to get out of our way, right? It's kind of the way we look at it. So he don't get God's attention. He don't get God's people's attention. He's just a lone prayer out there. But his brother Jack over there, he has been faithful to the church every Sunday, and he's donated to the church both his money and his time. And he's got this situation, and the whole congregation prays for him, and then they get prayer warriors on Facebook to pray for him. And the action there convinces me that they, if not consciously, subconsciously, they honestly believe that the more people they get praying, the more they can convince God to save this person. So, or to do something for this person, to change the law of physics or whatever for this person. But the poor guy that don't know anybody is not going to get God's attention because he's never going to get great numbers of people and prayer warriors to come to his defense, to come to plead for him. So let's say that we're going to set the Bible aside and we're going to think about God. And if you look at the Bible, well, wait a minute. Let's change the way we look at the Bible for a second. From a Jewish tradition, First of all, if you look at the Old Testament, there are not, the Jews just didn't concern themselves with an afterlife. That wasn't their thing. They weren't into an afterlife. They did concern themselves about seeking, you know, God's mercy. They suffered some horrible events in their lives, and certain things they credited to God, and certain things they didn't. They were being punished, whatever. But they never. This afterlife thing did not come till much later on. So we're going to set this afterlife thing aside for a minute. As you're viewing this God and you're trying to come to terms with what this God would do, what exactly would an all-knowing, all-loving God do if you were in the position, if you knew a little child was being molested by a teacher, by an uncle, by a pastor? Would you intervene? If you had the ability, would you intervene? Would you at least contact the authorities? Would you snatch the child up and protect the child? If you had the ability to wipe out cancer, I mean, you're God. You just fake it and it's gone, right? I mean, that's how all this came about. This was all just a thought in God's head, and poof, it's here. Would you end cancer? Would you end heart failure? Would you? What would you do? What would you do if you were going down the road and you could prevent a horrible accident from happening? Would you intervene? Would your heart motivate you to say, whoa, I can stop this? Would you snatch the man from the railroad tracks before the train ran over him? Or would you simply say, oh, free will? Free will. He chose to lay there. He chose to get drunk. He chose whatever. So, free will. I'm going down the road. Sorry. You think about that. You're human. In essence, and I haven't always said this, I have said this many times to myself and others. In essence, it's like people expect more out of me than they do their God. People hold out a higher expectation from me and what I should do than they do their God. And then they just kind of toss it aside as that's the mystery of God. Well, you don't know my mind. It's the mystery of me. I've got a bigger plan. Really? Is that going to work in a court of law when the father neglects the child or abuses the wife or turns a blind eye to what's going on with their child over here? It's free will. They made their choice. Tell that to the judge. I jokingly say God worked 6 days and had to take the seventh off. I'm not God. I need more than one day off after working six. But here's this all knowing, all loving, all powerful God, but you hold humans to a higher expectation than you do this God. See, I don't think you understand God. I think you're depending on this book too much. And this book's already, we know, gave birth to over 33,000 different denominations. I think there's a total misunderstanding of the purpose of this book, where it came from. And I think that our dependence on that book to define God is the problem. Instead of just using, as people would say, our God given brains. we living in a time right now to where a great number in our society looking at Trump as God sent savior of this. It's like, okay, he's a human. So you're saying that Trump can do what God can't. We miss the point. We missed the boat. If you as a human were God, you would and all this creation, all this humans were your creation, your progeny, your children. You would look at them and say, you stop fighting. I'm gonna separate you. I'm gonna, just stop fighting. Get along. As they grew older, they matured, you expect even more of them. Take care of your home. Pick up, clean up. Your environment is important. Be clean. Take care of your environment and take care of each other. Yeah, I think you would demand those things. I think those would be two things really high up on your list of to-dos for your creation. I provided you this house, your home, which is this planet. Take care of it and share. Don't be selfish. Have you ever told your kids that? Don't be selfish. I bet you have if you've got kids. Don't be selfish. But yet that's what we are. That's what we are as a people as we stand before our God. We do everything as adults that we tell our kids not to do. Our expectations for each other are higher than they are for our God, who sits idly by as we do obnoxious things. And then after the damage is done or in the middle of the damage, we beg and plead for mercy and strength and all these things and never question why it was allowed to happen to begin with. We just blow it off. We grow from it. Yes, that's a popular one. We grow from it. We learn from it. I don't think you're going to get too many people who claim Christianity to turn their backs on the Bible. I don't think that's a reality. I don't think that is something that you can remain and call yourself a Christian and you're going to say that the book is, I'm going to ignore that book. First of all, from a Christian viewpoint, the entire belief system is based on the stories about Jesus and the later stories written by others about his life in what we call the New Testament. Without those stories, there would be no such belief that we call Christianity. Without those stories as recorded in that book, there would be no Jesus and that story. Jesus came from, again, Judaism. He was raised a Jew. And as a Jew, he was brought up under those traditions. But at some point in his life, he said, and he didn't word it to say that I am abolishing the law. He said, I've come to fulfill the law. And if you read carefully Matthew 5, 6, and 7, which is called sometimes the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus indeed turned the law into principle. And he started this when he's talking about, he said, you've heard it said that adultery is wrong. In fact, under the Jewish law, adultery the result of adultery was a stoning, put to death. Adulterous woman was stoned to death. And Jesus said, I'm telling you that if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. It's very clear that he's turning this into principle. You see, the Israelites were, according to the story, given this perfect law from the hands of God, the Mosaic law. Moses, Mount Sinai, goes up there and he gets not 10 commandments, 613 commandments written on stone. And that becomes the law of the Israelites for a very long time. It started out being enforced by a patriarch system. And, I agree with you, by the way, Frosted 1030. I get all that. I'm trying, don't think that I disagree with you. I understand where all that came from, but you don't get people's attention by throwing something so dramatic in their face as hard as that. You have to speak a different language in order to get people to listen to you. And I've been guilty of the same, and I have turned people off because immediately when you start talking a certain way, it becomes a language they don't understand, a language they've been warned about. If you were brought up in Christianity like I was, you were told not to question. That if you questioned anything, that you were letting Satan in. And that is what they do. I've had many conversations over the years with Christians, and they close their minds real quick. What you're saying is 100% true, but they can't handle it. You're not going to educate them by just tossing that very strong in their face. They can't accept that. And it just closes their ears, and you've gotten nowhere. You may have stated a truth. That's fine. You stated a truth, but you didn't accomplish anything by stating it, because immediately they shut down. And I was guilty of that for years until I woke up and realized I was the same way. You have to reason with people, and you have to reason in a way that they can understand. I understand astrotheology. I can lay it out perfectly, and I see it very clearly in the Bible now. The 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Christ, blah, 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 Hare Krishna, Mithra, all these, and how they fall in line together. And where I'm going with this whole thing is our interpretation of a God. That's the whole consensus, proving God exists or proving Jesus is real. They're so intent on that, they miss the message. Where I'm coming from is that we can learn from any story. There's something to be learned from any story. We learn from Aesop's fables. We learn from nursery rhymes as kids. And to just say that you can't learn, it's understanding the story. The problem with the Gentiles, which I'm a Gentile, I'm not a Jew, is our literalizing the Bible. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's a book of stories, and there's different versions of it. The Catholics have some 73 books. The Protestants have 66 books. And they don't question why these shifts, why Martin Luther ran from the Catholic Church, nailed his thesis up on the church door, and immediately he says, I don't like this book. Let's toss this. Let's toss that. He chewed it down to 66 books. Nobody questions the things that about the Bible. And you have to get them and lead people to where they will. You cannot force it or cram it down their throat. If you go and you're looking to buy a car, and the salesman is immediately trying to push something on you, and you feel pushed, you're not allowed to make what you feel a conscious choice, something attracts to you, you'll be turned off by whatever that salesman's saying. He's saying, oh, you are so-and-so, and you look like you need this car. Maybe they're trying to get rid of this car, It's one that they've got to sell, and he's really trying to push that car on you, and he's ignoring other things. He's not selling to you, more or less, is what I'm saying. But if you force these things down their throats, they shut down. You've gotten nowhere. They're not going to listen to you. I know. I was there. Exactly. You can't put, and you know what you're saying. There's 100% honest truth. Jesus came from the Horus, Krishna. It's all plagiarism. There's no denying that. But I've tried that approach before, and they shut down immediately because they're so indoctrinated. They're so indoctrinated with this belief that someone had to die for them. My whole thing is, if you listen to this whole ramble I've been giving this morning, what would a real deity say? Would a real God need to sacrifice his son? The ritual of symbolically drinking blood and eating flesh. It was always amazing to me that, not always, but I reached a point to where I woke up to the fact that we looked at Satanists. They got animal and they sacrifice these kids and human sacrifices. Like, wait a minute, have you ever read the freaking Bible? Have you know what communion is? The entire Christian belief system is based on a human sacrifice. It stems from a history of animal sacrifice, a lot of bloodletting. But the Christian has no problem dogging out a book they're very not familiar with, and that's the Quran, when it basically comes from the same roots as the Christian Bible does. But they miss out on stories, and in the astrotheological interpretation of the Bible, which I personally think is very credible, there's still lessons to be learned. There's still things to be learned. You don't have to shut the book and just toss the book totally aside. You can reteach the book. You can retrain people. We're a ritualistic animal, number one. Some of us have the ability, the whatever it takes, to feel quite comfortable with saying that when I die, I'm dead. Other people don't have that. Other people have got something that just puts them in a situation emotionally, their psyche, they just cannot deal with the fact that this is it. They've got to have some comfort in knowing, thinking that there's something after this life. One of the things that got me about the Christian belief early on was the fact that, according to the Christian teachings, God created angels. Those angels have been around since the beginning of creation. They're not having cancer and heart disease, and as far as I know, they've not created guns and don't go to war with each other and that sort of thing. They don't suffer as we do. And even Satan, from the very beginning, was there, and according to all the teachings of Christianity, Satan's still here. Satan is still here. If God got it at least that right with angels, why did he create us? What is this? Our hope of going through this years of suffering, pain, and a horrible existence and having to suffer death, and our reward is to get what they were created with? Where's the sanity in that? See, people don't ask questions, and that's what you grow from, is the asking of questions. But if you put things too direct in some people's faces, they immediately shut down. They hit overload. It is like a slap in the face to them. And it is more than they can possibly deal with, because you just told them that it's like going to a doctor and being told that you've got cancer and you're going to die in 3 months. Words nobody wants to hear, but truth is often that way. So as you go through this, you pay attention to these stories, and you see from some hardcore presentations of it, like you're saying there, is very true. But if I come across and I use those words as direct as you did, immediately click, they sign off. I've lost my audience. I've lost the ones. I mean, otherwise, I'm just talking to people that agree with me. How do you get the attention of those that don't agree with you? How do you present an argument to anyone that doesn't agree with you to get them to listen? How can you effectively teach someone and present them something and keep them to listen, so that you can lead them through a thought process, so that you can teach them a new way of viewing something? If you're brought up in a tradition of a belief system, and someone comes along and their first words to you is, "That's bullshit," are you going to listen? Is that going to convince them it's bullshit? Is that going to get their attention? Or are they going to hang on to your words and say, "Oh, yes, so tell me, please. Tell me about the bullshit I'm buying into. Correct me"? Most people know. Most people are going to say, "Screw you." Most people are not going to sit there and invite you to say some more words if what you've done is come out from left field and simply say, "That's bullshit." You have to reason with people, and you have to use convincing argument, and you have to be able to take their viewpoint and grow from where they are. That's the way we learn in schools. That's the way we learn and we grow. You can't expect a child to be able to understand things that it took you into adulthood to understand. So you do. You have to say, "Wait a minute, I've learned all this. This is new to them. They've never heard this. This would be a shock to their system if I just throw this crap out there too quick. I'll lose my audience. I'll lose who I'm trying to talk to. I've gained nothing." So I have to go back and I have to say, this is the foundation. I know I was part of it. This is where it comes from. And so I have to go from that starting point to where I have to start where they are and build on that from there to get them to think. A lot of things I do and I present. I like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot and his wife and the two daughters is like, okay, so Lot and his family were visited by these angels. This is the Bible story. And told to get out of town. I'm fixing to burn these cities down. So they pack up what little bit they had could carry, I guess. And they get to the side of the mountain, and Lot's wife turns around to see her city or hometown, her house being burned down, and God says, "Oh, screw that." Turns her into a pillar of salt. A couple of days later, Lot's two daughters and him are laid up in a cave, and the two daughters look at Dad and say, "Oh, man, Mom's a pillar of salt. She's not going to have any male child for Dad. Let's get him drunk. Let's screw him. See if we get pregnant by him. Maybe we'll have male children for him." They did. That's exactly what they did. God didn't have any issue with that. God had issue with Lot's wife turning around to see her city burned down, turned her into a pillar of salt, but the two daughters getting dear old Dad drunk. I don't know. I guess when they left the house, they made sure they raided the wine cellar and grabbed some booze to take with them when they left, because I don't know where else they got the booze from. But short time after Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt, the daughters get him drunk, screw him, and have his babies. And God had no issue with that. There was nothing in there to indicate that there was any issue, but God certainly had an issue with Lot's wife looking back at the house being destroyed. Is that a real story? See, people don't question those things. And in the world of Christianity, you're taught not to question. That's Satan getting in. Satan, you're allowing Satan into your mind. That is planting seeds of doubt. Well, when that one book gives birth to some 33,000 different denominations, that to me is a big enough seed of doubt to make me ponder and to make me question how can a book from God, an all-knowing benevolent creature, how can a book from God give birth to so many different denominations? That's total insanity. It's a roll of the dice. My eternity is based on a roll of the dice. So when it comes to denominations, we're not looking for truth. We're looking for comfort. We're looking for, oh, I like this over here. I'm comfortable here. I like the music they play. I like the preacher or whatever. Those things are palatable to me. But the human expectation is higher for other humans than it is for their gods, because gods are supposed to be bowed down to, worshiped, plead for mercy, all these things, as the God sits idly by and allows horrible things to happen to people around the world. And just like the divisions of people on the planet, the Christian churches remain in this country the most segregated of institutions. I'm not saying there's no dark-skinned people in a church that's predominantly white. Very few. You can usually like, ooh, wait a minute, I think I see, yep, there's a couple over there is dark-skinned. Especially the mega churches, you'll see that more. Smaller churches, you're not apt to. You go to a neighborhood where there's a church and it's all dark-skinned people. You're gonna, is there a white person there? It's a bunch of dark skins because they're segregated. All these denominations claiming the same God, all these races, the same, the blacks, the whites, they speak the same language, they live in the same communities, they believe in the same God, they hope for the same eternity, the same destination, but the few 70, 80 years that they dwell on this earth, they can't join together or get along, even though they anticipate living together forever. Figure that one out. So yeah, Frosted 1030, there's absolutely no doubt that you are correct. But I try to present my things in a way that don't get people to immediately shut down. I have to go and get to where they are and grow them from that point. Because if I start here, if they're at this point and I start here with what I'm presenting, I'm going to lose them immediately. Just like if I didn't agree with you, you would have lost me immediately. It's like, what the hell is he talking about? Because you just gave a one-line statement of what that I happen to agree with, I happen to know. But for your benefit, if you're going through and you're trying to help anybody to grow and learn, I don't know where you came from, know nothing about you. I think you have got it. I think you have understanding. Be nice if you learn to present that understanding in a way to keep people to listen to you instead of turn them off. See, we've gotten in this society, this confrontational thing. Impeach Pelosi, impeach Trump. We're not getting anywhere. Those arguments are not convincing anybody to just post constantly on Facebook and social media and even on LinkedIn now, of all places. This constant rant of Pelosi's evil, Trump's evil, and all this blah, blah, blah. You're not changing anybody's mind. You're not convincing anybody to change their mind. See, nobody takes the time for an adult conversation to be able to sit back and say, wait a minute, this is where you are. I understand where you are. Can I see where you are? And can we start here at this level And can I lead you on the path that I came? And maybe then you can see where I'm going. You have to give them little bites, little bits. They've never tasted it before. So when you get food that somebody's talked you into eating that you've never eaten before and you're scared of it, what do? You get a little piece of it. You get that little taste, or maybe it's a sip, of something you've never. I'm not sure if I'm going to like this. You start out with little sips. You go to the beach, you don't know whether the water's cold or hot. You normally just stick your toe in. See, that's the way we are. That's the way that we grow. It's like we get more comfortable with something. So we have to get people more comfortable with what we're trying to present to them. We cannot just pounce on them. Sure, that may be Christianity's way to just pounce on people. You're going to burn in hell if you don't believe like I do. There's no argument there. It's insulting to a non-believer. It's to me an act of terrorism, terrorist threats. It's on billboards. It's on bumpers. It's everywhere you go. And we have to tolerate that. But we have to be better. We've got to be bigger and better. Because what we do have is we do have certainly more truth because we've studied the history of these things. So that's my approach. And it's not always easy because you feel like you're being pounced on. It's hard to be better. You know, when you're slapped, the initial reaction is to slap back. And we get nowhere. So if I want you to understand where I am, I have to find a place where you are so that I can reach you, that I can grab your hand and I can bring you to where I am. And it's a process. It's not a badgering. It's not an insulting. Unfortunately, with social media and even our president and on, we've gotten this whole aura of this ugliness going on to where we don't take the time to do that. And like what I've got scrolling the page here, they're more concerned about proving God is real or proving Jesus is real than actually getting any kind of message from it. So I tell people even from a viewpoint of, to me, it's not saying the Bible is false. To me, it's saying the Bible's misunderstood. It's misinterpreted. It doesn't matter whether the stories in the Bible are real stories or not. Shouldn't it only matter if you can get anything out of those stories of any benefit? And there are things that you can learn as morals of the story, so it were, if you take the supernatural out of it. Even Thomas Jefferson, who went through his transition with Christianity, if you will. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jefferson Bible. He took all the supernatural out of the story of Jesus and wrote his own version of the New Testament called the Jefferson Bible. And you can look it up. He took all the supernatural, the walking on water, the raising of the dead, the healing the sick, the feeding people with a loaf of bread. I mean, all that stuff. He took that out. He said, what do we learn from this? Take all this supernatural crap out of here. What can we learn from this story? Well, on this very basic level, there is a lot of teachings about love there. If you take these stories from a literalist viewpoint, it's confusing as fuck. There's no wonder that there's 33,000 different denominations coming from that one book because they're trying to be literalist. If you look at it as just stories like the Jews didn't write these things as literal stories. The Jews did not even believe or think about an afterlife. They certainly didn't believe anybody died for their sins. I'm not promoting Judaism, but they wrote those books. Those words ultimately came from Jewish writers. Those stories came from Jewish tradition. And yes, ultimately, all these stories coincide from Hare Krishna to Mithra to Horus. They all have these similarities because it is astrotheological. It all based on, it was very important back in those, they didn't have electricity and they didn't have natural gas. They didn't have the change of the seasons was their very survival, their very lives depended on knowing when they were moving from one season to the other and the planetary changes and whatnot. They didn't have TV. They didn't have books. Most people were illiterate. In the Hebrew language, there was not even a written form of the language. There were no vowels. They didn't write it. It was a spoken language, which in the early parts of our history as humans, that was the case. So they told stories. And those stories, they could lay back and they knew the planetary system pretty good for the naked eye, but they didn't have our ambient light. They didn't have all the distraction we've got. Their entire entertainment was storytelling and gazing at nature and learning. It was part of our evolution. That was their entertainment. They didn't have Shakespeare to read. They didn't have operas to go to. They didn't have, their drawings were on cave walls. So they could interpret things from, we're going from Taurus the bull to the ram. And when you learn these things, it's very much in your face, isn't it? The symbol that Christians use for Jesus, the fish, Pisces. The story in the Bible where Jesus told his followers that when he left to go into the city and find the man carrying a pitcher of water and enter into the house that he entered, Aquarius. He goes on and on and on. But if you take someone that has this literalist view of the Bible and is bought heavily into Christianity, and they go through life and they drinking the symbolic blood of Jesus and eating the symbolic flesh of Jesus and depending on that human sacrifice, that spilled blood to wash their sins away. And you attack them with that, albeit truth. It's more than they can handle. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to shut you down immediately. You're taking away my faith. You're challenging me. See, it's time we quit challenging each other, and it's time we started mentoring each other. It's time we quit attacking each other, and it's time we start bringing and maturing those that haven't learned what we've learned. If what we have is truth, truth should stand on its own. It don't need us to come out and start attacking and pouncing and belittling. I'm as guilty as anyone is. And I've seen it's not changed anybody. I end up singing to the choir. I end up not changing anybody's views on anything. Just the ones that agree with me are saying, amen, brother, I agree with you. The ones that don't, I'm no different than the church. Except we've got something to really share. We've got something to really present. If you did away with organized religion and politics, you would do away with 90% of the dissension in the world. But how do we do that with billions of people so wrapped up in patriotism, nationalism, billions of people so wrapped up in religion and belief in gods? How do we change that? Do we change it by belittling? Do we change it by attacking? Or we change it by understanding and mentoring? I can't take someone that has yet to put 1 and 1 together to equal 2 and expect them to understand calculus. Don't you get this? Look at this formula. They're still trying to grasp the concept of 1 and 1 equal 2. I have to get on their level, understand where they are, so that advance, hopefully up here, and not all will change. As my generation dies off, the world is becoming more secular, even in the so-called Bible Belt of this state that I live in. It's becoming more secular and more secular. The last over a decade of my life has been a career of weddings, because I am very left field, open-minded, if you will. And I would serve those that traditional churches would not serve. And I've seen more and more atheists, more agnostics, more people questioning, more people burned out with church. I get more and more, I'm spiritual but not religious. So it is going, slowly going. And that's the way it generally goes. We're not caught up with Europe, who has become a more secular part of the globe. The more religious and the more God believing nations are the ones that are constantly at war, aren't they? The Muslims and the Christians are still at it, even though the secularists are more peaceful people generally. But Frosted, to attack, your first here was you sound like a slave. To attack does not change. It does not convince. It does not keep someone's ears open. It does not help anybody grow. If it's your intent simply to bash, slap, if you will, it doesn't affect me in that way, but that's maybe your intent. I don't know. You sound like a slave, and then you come up with your next comment, which I happen to believe with. I certainly don't think I'm a slave, because I'm not a slave to any belief system. I'm certainly not drinking the symbolic blood or eating the flesh. I don't think anybody had to die for me just because I was born human. I think that's obnoxious, and I think it's child abuse to teach your children this kind of thing. But I know that if I, again, come off the way you did, you sound like a slave, that a lot of people would simply just shut down and say, who the fuck is that? Am I going to listen to you for? So if you got anything in a thing I presented this morning, give thought to the way you approach people if you truly want to help people to grow and to learn from where they are. Anybody can. Anybody can, if they're approached properly. Christianity itself grew out of force. The indigenous people of this land did not give up their customs and their traditions and their views of nature and God and so forth because they were convinced to out of being educated. They gave it up because the white man threatened them in many ways, that if you don't convert to Christianity, I mean, you can still find the pictures of what we did, because they depended on buffalo out in the plains of the Wild West. And we went and mass slaughtered buffalo because we wanted to subject them. This is why these religions are where they are today and so divisive and so cruel and so hateful, is because that's the way they were converted. The same way with the black people, African Americans. Gosh, there's even books written. You can find them. At least one very popular book back in those days, of a guidebook of how to convert a black man to Christianity. That very book, the Bible, was used to support the enslaving of the blacks. I've often said, how can any female or any black person join forces with Christianity, it makes no sense. Do they blind themselves as to what that belief did to them for such a period of time? But yet it just doesn't stop. And if it weren't for the blacks and it weren't for the women, I suggest that Christianity would fall apart pretty quick. I suggest that Christianity would fall apart pretty quick if it wasn't for the very ones who were once recently persecuted so harshly by this belief system based on that book. But for some reason, they have bought into it. And you're not going to change them by attacking them. You're not going to help them grow by attacking them. You're not going to lead them to understanding of what you just suggested in that message at 4:13 a.m. by attacking them. All you do is close their ears and they clench their fist and walk away from you. So when you find somebody, and I know instantaneously you see the line there that says IOCCHURCH. In our culture, yes, the word church means people. Those IOCCHURCH, that stands for International Old Catholic Church, not Roman Catholic. The word Catholic means universal. We get caught up on labels for legal reasons and for tax reasons in this nation. I use the word church. But my message, what I talk and what I lead people and try to educate people to, is a totally different message than you're going to find in mainstream Christianity. I'm not calling myself Christian. Nowhere in the name International Catholic Church do you see Christian or Hindu or Muslim or any of the above. We, the people, are the miracle workers. I often say, don't pray for a miracle, be the miracle. There was a little book that influenced me back in my early Christian days, written by Norman Vincent Peale, that said, expect a miracle, make miracles happen. Ultimately, we are the answer to our prayers. Ultimately, we are the answer to other people's prayers. Ultimately, we are gods. We are doing the work of a God. And that's not saying there is a God. We're just filling the role of a God. Because ultimately, we are the ones that are starting wars, ending wars, promoting peace, promoting war, feeding each other, caring for each other, caring for the planet. When I was a kid, throughout even most of my teens, was before there was a EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. No God came in and cleaned the atmosphere as we drove into Birmingham, Chattanooga, any major city, any mid-sized city, Nashville, whatever. You drove into that city and immediately your eyes burned in water. The atmosphere was so horrible. You fly into Los Angeles and you can see from the air Los Angeles 100 miles away a dark cloud. No God cleaned that up. That was human miracles of Environmental Protection Agency. No God brought us penicillin. For thousands of years, man died from different things that penicillin would have cured, suffered from things that penicillin would have cured, but any God out there remained silent and idle for man to be the miracle worker, didn't he? No God did a heart transplant, kidney transplant. It is troubling, and I'm with you. It's very troubling when you see someone get sick and they've got to have some medical procedure to save their lives or give us some comfort. They run to a doctor, they run to the hospital. These people that have worked hard and gone through medical school and learned science, learned medical science, and learned these procedures, they do the work and get it done. Their peers, the people they learned from, created these procedures, these life-saving procedures. These people run to these men and women for this miracle of modern science. And then they'll think, thank you for your prayers. God has worked a miracle. Like, I don't see God in there anywhere. If God had worked a miracle, why did he need all that to take place? And why did he wait till the 20th century to get this done? What about all those billions and trillions of people that lived for thousands of years before this came along? What about the people that endured the Black Plague? See, they won't ask those questions. And if you present it too forward, too much in their face, they're going to shut you down. They're going to close their ears real quick. You've got to reach down to where they are, to lift them up, to bring them up. Just because Christianity chooses a path of demeaning others and threatening people with eternal torment, banishes people from communities and families because of belief systems, just because that is their technique, which is failing them, which is dramatically failing them, by the way. It's not working. In fact, it's chasing people away from the belief system. We want people to grow. We want people to learn. We want people to understand. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if Jesus is real or God was real. If you ask yourself what loving, benevolent, all-knowing God would need to send his son to earth to die for you after thousands of years of having his chosen people slaughter animals for a ransom sacrifice, why all the bloodletting? Why is that necessary? And why does he make you suffer and die? Satan still persists. Oh, there was a battle in heaven and Satan was cast down to the earth. Oh, God forbid. Poor Satan. All that time, an eternity, angels, an eternity. Why humans? So we can hope to one day live as angels and become angels when God got that right to begin with. See, ask questions. Don't be afraid of questions. So it's not a matter of does God exist or proving Jesus was real. It's a matter of thinking your way through this. And then it doesn't become a question of trying to prove a God or disprove a God. It becomes a question of what do I get from this message? What can I learn? At the end of the day, what can I walk away with that's good? I can walk away with we are human. I can walk away we're incomplete humans. We all grow. I can walk away with knowing that no great deity is punishing me because I happen to have been born human. I can walk away with appreciation that I've had this life. And instead of concerning myself constantly with what happens after death, I can embrace this life. I can get something out of this existence. I can enjoy to the best of my ability this life that I have. I can be grateful that this two people, this man, this woman, sometime in the year 1954, had sex that resulted in me. I can accept that. I can embrace it. We know what death is. We know clearly what death is because we were dead before our death was briefly interrupted by this life. And for that eternity of death, we were not troubled by it. It did not bother us. Jack Van Impe, who was one of these prophetic type preachers who just died a couple of days ago, 88 years old. preached his never-ending sermon of wars and the United States being God's people, this constant rhetoric of war and Armageddon and end times. And guess what? He made his Armageddon. Some people would say now he's with God in heaven. And what's interesting about that from a biblical viewpoint, because they all claim this Christianity, is that the Bible does not even suggest that you die and you go to heaven. That's not what the Bible at best suggests a resurrection from the dead, but they immediately, in fact, you go walk through some old cemeteries. And the further back you go in the tombstones when people died, you would find tombstones that would say words like awaiting a resurrection or asleep in Jesus. But somewhere, especially in the middle part of the 20th century, that started morphing into you immediately got shipped to heaven. See, even Christianity is not consistent because it's not about truth, it's about comfort. It's not about reality, it's about comfort. It's a feel good. It's a feel good that unfortunately has led to a lot of bad. I run another website called boycottchurches.org. Boycottchurches.org. They want to bring prayer, quote unquote, into schools every week, and I can't keep up with it. You do an internet search of 2 words, pastor charged. Every week, case after case after case of another pastor getting arrested, getting charged for pedophilia, for molesting little kids in church, impregnating 14-year-old girls, on and on and on into infinity. It never ends. It's an epidemic in the Christian church. Of course, really, it's an epidemic in our society as a whole. But you can't tell me that prayer is important because it's stemming from the very institution that promotes prayer by the very men who do the praying. In the meantime, they are praying, Preying, for little kids. Boycottchurches.org. I even did a video, which I can't even update the video now. There's so many cases. So no, I'm certainly not promoting a belief in God or Christianity and that sort of thing. I'm trying to get people to question what would a all-knowing, benevolent God promote. If you were God, would you resolve certain issues? I think that's important. I'm just trying to get people to think. At the end of the day, if I can provide convincing argument, if I can provide thought-provoking comment, that is the best I can do. So from a Christian viewpoint, I would suggest if you want to learn more about a message from this Jesus that you would take as literal from the Bible, shut everything else out and start with Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Read those 3 chapters. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Shut everything else out and start there. You might learn something. Whether you believe Jesus was real or not, doesn't matter. It doesn't change a thing. Believing that stuff does not change hearts. Believing that stuff does not change, it hasn't changed history for the good anywhere. No matter what people say, proof is in the pudding. We've 244 years as a nation, we've had 93% of our existence as this nation. Of those 244 years we've been in conflict. I was taught that if I found myself in constant conflict, I need to look in the mirror, not to be continually pointing my finger at other people, blaming them for always being against me. So, question. Dare to question and think. If you believe that your brain is God-given, use it. How's that? And maybe you'll learn that there's more to the story than what you've been told. Well, I've been at this for an hour and a half this morning, totally non-scripted, and it started out as kind of a ramble. And I would like to thank Frosted 1030 for having tuned in, and also for addressing my little presentation this morning. Thank you, and have a wonderful Monday.